Welcome back. So we've been explaining a job order costing system. And by the job, we can have 5, 10, 15 jobs that are being worked on. And each job is assigned a job number, and we can analyze individually the performance of those jobs. So now let's go take a look at process costing. We're going to go in and see that process costing still has materials, labor, and overhead, but we also have an added wrinkle called equivalent units of production. So what percentage done are we? Because our processes are going to be in the middle of operation. At the end of the month, we don't turn off all the machines. We don't have all the Mountain Dew that we made or Coca-Cola that's made and close things out because things are going to still be in process. So we have to figure out how far along in the process those things are. So with products are in a continuous manufacturing environment, again, think Pepsi or Coca-Cola, when we determine the cost of a single unit, we're going to have to divide that number of units through the process during the period of time. So we have some additional math calculations to worry about. We do have a cost of production report, and we organize that. And I mentioned the term equivalent units. So we have a summary of units in process, equivalent units in process. We have so many units that are 50% complete. Well, that means they're half done. We got half the units equivalent done. Total cost to be accounted for and cost per equivalent unit to account for the total costs. So let's go a little deeper and see how that works. So equivalent completed units. This is an interesting concept to kind of to wrap your arms around. So refer to the number of completed units equal in terms of production effort to a given number of partially completed. So assume 90 units in the ending inventory are 40% complete. Equivalent units are 36 units. We have 40% of the 90. You can also think on full-time equivalents when you have 30 people working half-time. How many FTEs does government have? Well, we have 15. Or how many full-time student equivalents do you have? If we have a semester, we say 15 credit hours is a full-time student in a semester, we can count all the credit hours and divide by 15 to have the full-time equivalent number of students. I mean, some students might be taking one course or two courses. Some might be taking 6 courses. But we just average it out. If we could say 15 is our magic number, we're going to have equivalent units, equivalent students, here equivalent full-time equivalents in people, or equivalent units of production in the assembly line. So here's our cost of production report. So here's our dog food. Again, that's a process we're making and keep making off the line. I just bought some Purina one today. So we're looking at this units in process, beginning of period, 80% converted. So we're actually figuring out the unit started, completed and transferred, and what is the level of completion at the end of the process. So we're not going to worry about the 80% here, but we are going to worry about the 30% down here. So we know what we have, we know what we're doing, and we're going to figure out what the costs are. Again, we've had this good cost of good manufacture analysis, beginning materials of costs, conversion costs. So we're combining what it takes to convert these goods, and we're going to have labor and overhead to do that. So we've got materials and labor and overhead is the definition of the conversion costs. Current manufacturing costs, raw materials, direct labor for the period, and the overhead applied for the period. So what's the summary look like? Summary of units in process. We started, and we do actually do units here. We started with 5,600, and we started to process another 23,000 in the system. So in process, we have 28,600. How many did we complete? In this case, 25,400, which yields 3,200 still in process at the end of the month or whatever time period we're associating it. And materials incurred primarily at the beginning of the process. So for the Pepsi, we're adding the sugar or high fructose corn syrup. With Mountain Dew, we're adding the orange juice. We're adding the carbonated water, usually at the beginning. But then we go through a process. If we're baking cakes, if we're making Twinkies, same thing. We mix the flour, the water, the sugar, whatever, high fructose corn syrup again, yeast, whatever other things. Those are usually added in the beginning of the process. But then we have baking. We have to heat things up. We have to package. So there are a whole bunch of things in the process, but most of the materials are usually at the beginning of the process. Most of the labor and overhead are considered throughout the process. We have equivalent units. They have conversion costs. You're usually given the percentage normally don't have to calculate in the problems here. Obviously, you're an industry, you do get to calculate that. But for what we're doing, we'll probably give most of the equivalent units and we'll be told how many complete they are. So again, we have the materials and we have the conversion costs, the labor and overhead going into that, and the equivalent units associated with the process. So we look at the total cost to be accounted for, beginning, current cost, total cost, equivalent units. So we're dividing through, and we have a cost per equivalent unit in the process, cost for materials and conversion cost for a total. That total is a useful number to figure out what our costs are, because when we start figuring out a selling price, when we start analyzing profitability, we're going to have to look at what our costs are. And there are some things, sometimes there are fixed costs we got to be careful of including or not including, because if we have multiple products that we're making and how do we allocate some of those things, that's some of the complexities that we get into in costing and analysis in managerial accounting. So we transferred out, we had 25.4 units transferred out, and we have an equivalent unit of 269. So there's a dollar amount. Ending work in process, we have the materials and the conversion, how many equivalent units are there, and here's the total cost that we need to account for. Okay. And when we look at, we do have two methods. We have weighted average. We don't separate the beginning units, which is actually more commonly used. It's a little bit easier. Spreads the combined beginning inventory and current period cost over the units completed, plus those in ending inventory on an average basis. FIFO, we know and love FIFO, counts separately for the beginning units. First cost incurred each period are assumed to have been used to complete the unfinished units carried over. More precise, but more complex. Again, what I'm going to be doing, emphasizing in this course, is weighted average, is where we want to be. And then average cost for similar or identical items is determined. Those average costs, easier to track the cost, and we want to see what's going on. We're analyzing, we're looking, and we're saying, okay, what is our average cost per unit? And that average cost per unit will jump out at us and say, okay, here's a number we can hang our hat on. Now let's use it in the decision-making process. Do we need to sell for more? Do we need to worry about controlling other costs, or maybe raw materials, maybe labor? We got to worry about possibly overtime. Maybe how much more can we afford? If we are a union shop, we got to worry about the unions and paying our employees. So those all go into cost analysis and cost factors. Thank you for listening. And we have one more segment to go in this module. I look forward to seeing you shortly.